by Oriah Mountain Dreamer.
It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, be realistic, remembering the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me to know who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else fades away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments.
Well, it occurred to me this week that the period we're in right now, this spiritual awakening time, is very parallel to the Protestant Reformation. So here's the sermon, the Reformation, which we are in, comparing it to then, which was 1517, when Martin Luther nailed 95 Theses to the church in Wittenberg. 1517, and now I just want you to know that history was not my best subject in school. I have to work really hard to learn history. So I've done my research for what the Reformation was about, but I've always known this much. The Protestant Reformation was in protest to the authority of the Catholic Pope, the Pope. And that's what Protestant. And unity is technically not a Protestant religion because it did not originate in protest of anything, really. It arose more out of the Transcendentalist movement, which was a similar kind of awakening to the Protestant Reformation. But we don't consider unity to be part of Protestantism. We consider it to be part of New Thought. Okay, just a note. But the three main ideas in the Protestant Reformation were, and Martin Luther lived in the 16th century. And just think, Martin Luther's name has lasted all these centuries. Is there any other name we remember from the 1500s? I don't. Everyone knows Martin Luther. It's just an amazing kind of popularity, wide acceptance that he has been given. And the three main ideas of the Protestant Reformation were, one, the Bible alone. It was like there are three marching cries. Bible alone was the source of authority, not the Pope, not some human figure. They considered the Bible alone. Faith alone, meaning the only salvation that is available to us is through our faith. No one grants it. No act of penance can give it to you. Only faith is your salvation. And bear in mind, the people back then, in the 1500s, they were more concerned with the afterlife than they were with the life. They were more concerned with what happened to them after their death and their salvation. They were obsessed with afterlife. Talk about not being present in the now, you know. And they were willing to do anything to avoid suffering in the afterlife. And that's what gave rise to this Protestant Reformation, was that they were selling indulgences. Indulgences were being sold by different authorities in the Catholic Church, which were pieces of paper that you paid money for, and it got you out of spending time in purgatory before you went to heaven. It seems absurd to us now, doesn't it? But it was very real to them. In fact, people were fighting and killing each other in the streets over who was right about this opinion. Yeah, and people were being also, executed for being heretics, for not accepting the one true faith. And then the third idea of the Protestant Reformation was the priesthood of all believers, saying that the role of priest was not valid, that we are all believers form a priesthood of equal status. So it really quite turned the whole traditional notion of Christianity, which called itself Catholicism because Catholicism means the universal truth, the only faith, turned it kind of on its ear and started a number of new religious movements. Okay, so that all played out into many different organized religions and spiritual leaders. But now fast forward to what we're in now, a new kind of Reformation. And I would say that you could really recognize the beginning of it with the Transcendentalists in America. There were other people who had flashes of inspiration, like Teresa of Avila, and who's the guy you like, Autumn? The mystic, what's his name? Can't think. Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg. But this nuanced conversation, it didn't become an organization, but it was a new kind of way of thinking that was brought forth by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, he lived from 1803 to 1882. He came out of Harvard University. He wrote essays based on his lectures, and it didn't ever crystallize into any recognizable organization. But it was such, it impressed so many people. And Charles and Myrtle Fillmore met at a literary gathering in study of Ralph Waldo Emerson's work. Now, you would think that the influence of the Transcendentalists was lost. And it wasn't so much that they were saying, this is what's so, this is the truth, this is what we stand for, as it was saying, not necessarily, we don't necessarily accept what's always been thought true. Not necessarily. God is not necessarily the deity you think of. God is present in all of nature. God is present in the soul of every person. That was a new idea back then, in the 1700s. And, I'm sorry, the 1800s. And it kind of died out as a movement, as people actively meeting and talking about it, but it was carried forward and permeated into the entire culture by none other than Louisa May Alcott. Her writings of Little Women, Little Men, all of her stories that carried with them such idealism, such reverence of people for one another and for their possibilities. She was the daughter of one of the main transcendentalists, Alcott. Her father was a man named Alcott, and he was like that, you know, with Ralph Waldo Emerson. He went to all the transcendentalist meetings, and he and Ralph Waldo Emerson were close friends. So now we find ourselves in a time when there's even new sections in the bookstores called New Spirituality. And there's all kinds of writers and workshops and videos and resources available to bring you a new approach to existence based on a spiritual awakening. You know, it really came on strong when Deepak Chopra hit the big time, and he had with him these other, I call them the New Age dog and pony show brat pack, which I wanted to be in. Wayne Dyer and Marianne Williamson. And they put on these One Spirit retreats all over the country, very high profile, you know, expensive, beautiful experiences. And it was nothing new to what the Unity work has always said these things, that consciousness is the true issue of your life. That the subconscious mind is like a photographic plate that carries with it the conditioning of the past, and it can be healed, it can be cleansed. The superconscious mind is the very consciousness of God, of divinity, and we carry that within our own being. These things are just so empowering. So, in this, what I'll call the new spirituality movement that we are in today, there are three qualities that I think we can recognize. One is self-empowerment. Just like in the original Protestant Reformation, it's giving authority and sovereignty to the individual over themselves. And it's so amazing. With that self-sovereignty comes self-responsibility. And being responsible for our entire existence, the three phases of consciousness, the choices we make in our daily lives, it's huge. I mean, it's a lot. It's a full-time occupation to be on a spiritual path. Then another theme of this new spirituality movement is the holistic treatment of issues. We talk about holistic health. It's not just health. It's the holistic treatment of economics, the holistic treatment of world politics and power, the holistic treatment of commerce and economics, the holistic treatment of our very planet, taking into account the big picture, how everything is a system which has many different dynamics, which, if not addressed equally, the solution will not work. We've caught on to that. And we've become, as a species, we've become very holistically oriented to the treatment of issues we're trying to correct. And the third most striking theme of what I'm calling this Reformation, this new spirituality movement, is consciousness awakening. And where that leads, some say it leads to ascension. Some say it leads to resurrection. Some say it leads to success and wealth. Some say it leads to eternal joy, the end of suffering. But what it does lead to is a richer and more meaningful and more passionate life in the now. So what we find is a common thread in all the sacred traditions, and that common thread is that people experience cosmic oneness when they really tune into life. That common thread is that each one of us has a universality as an individual. We are connected to all other life forms and matter. And that now is present in a new worldview that has emerged in humanity. So what we can do now is take this new found freedom and this new universal acceptance and reform our lives. This is the Reformation. Reform our lives from the ground up. We have to ask ourselves, how can we live in harmony with nature? You know, it's so wonderful now when you see a bumblebee, isn't it? Or a bat, knowing what they've been through because we've been out of harmony with nature, using poisons and trying to control growth and different flora and fauna, and then we end up destroying the very species that we must have for survival. How can we live in alignment with our own emotional and developmental needs? Isn't it funny how you go through life and at the end of your life you're rich enough to buy a big house, but you needed the big house when you first started life for your kids. But then you had to squash up into a little apartment because you didn't have any money yet. That's backwards, isn't it? I notice in Germany, I go over to Germany, and they're very progressive, and they're trying very hard to align their practices with the emotional and developmental needs of children. And what they have done is change the time that kids graduate from high school so that they don't make them go through those last few years of their teenage years strapped to the duties of high school, when they're starting to really want to kick their heels and live life and engage with one another. So what they have is a curriculum that ends when kids are 15. They graduate from high school and they can go on and do jobs like waitressing or secretary or, you know, low-end jobs. Or they can take a break and do some low-end jobs and then come back for the second lap of their education and go more professionally. Or they can stay in, but they have the choice. And I think that's much more in keeping with the emotional and developmental needs of young people. And that's the only reason they did it. How can we live with compassion for all sentient beings? Have you read about the corridor for migrating animals, migrating wildlife that's being created by people buying up lands, wealthy people, celebrities, movie stars, buying up lands that allow for migrating animals to have a corridor that goes all the way around the planet? This has happened. Have you read about this? It's amazing. And that is having compassion for living beings, for sentient beings. The answer to these questions, though, most importantly, comes by voicing these intentions and steadfastly knowing that they are possible to achieve. You realize that that's the power of the spoken word. So don't allow yourself to sink into doubt, saying, I don't know if we can get this, I don't know if we can survive, I don't know if this is going to happen. We have to know it in the sense of prayer knowing. When somebody calls and says, you know, we had this happen this week. Wayne fell and had to go to the emergency room, and they said he had a bleeding on the brain from the fall. And our prayer was, we know that there is good in this very moment, and that nothing, and that is something that good will come out of it that could not have happened in any other way. And the next thing I get is a text from Patty saying, well, he's been admitted, but now there is no brain bleed, but he's going to be taken care of. Was that a healing? But it was a result of, that's what happens when you know that absolute good is coming forth. So, by voicing our intentions and steadfastly knowing that they are possible, this is one of the most important things we can do. But we're left with the question, how can we embody these ideas as a spiritual community? This is our journey, and this is our destiny. Amen. you. Thank you. Oh. So now let's prepare for that journey inward in the silence, where we commune with the divine, where we restore the energies that quicken and heal and guide us. So breathing deeply, relaxing, getting in touch with the light that shines ever within. Our statement for meditation is, divine inspiration reveals new possibilities to me. So let's vocalize that affirmation together now. Together, divine inspiration reveals new possibilities to me. We all have this divine inspiration. We all experience the revelation within. And in this time, where we devote ourselves, we surrender our will, we tune in our imagination, we open our hearts, and we allow time to receive in the silence. We feel complete, whole, and free at every level. Thank you, glorious presence. Thank you. And so it is. Amen.